Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of AtScale's Data-Driven Podcast. Today, I'm really excited to have a special guest, Jepson Taylor. Jepson, who is the Chief AI Strategist at Dataiku, a friend of AtScale and the AtScale family in Boston. Really, someone in AI who you need to know and you need to read and read about. Because he's got a lot to say. So, Jepson, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Dave. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you have just such a amazing background. I would love it if you could just we could just open up this podcast with you telling the listeners a little bit about yourself, your path into data analytics and AI.
Yeah. Well, I think I think I should have gone into computer science sooner. So in college, when I was introduced to computer science, it was kind of the stereotypical, oh, these are the people that make computer games. And I didn't have an interest in doing that at the time. So I studied chemical engineering, but I was introduced to programming through web design, and that turned into computer vision and high performance computing. And I love high performance computing. Like even today, like if you said, Ben, do you want to go to the supercomputing convention? Yes, like it's Disneyland for me. So I worked in semiconductor at Intel and Micron for 5 years. I worked as a quant at a high performance computing hedge fund, trading on the news in 2012. And then I was the chief data scientist at HireVue, which was HR tech for 4 years. And then I built and sold a deep learning company to Data Robot a couple of years ago. So AI is everything I do now. You and I have joked in the past. Would you rather have better data or a better model? And as quickly as I could tap the button for better data, not a better model. For people in industry, they desperately want better data. I almost said the wrong thing. I almost said I want a better model.
Yeah, I love it. We've always talked about that well, it's garbage in, garbage out, that's kind of where it goes. But it's like I didn't realize that you studied as a chemical engineer. And it's just so interesting that how few people who end up in technical roles like we're in now actually studied that. I was an economics major, so nothing to do with it. It was my hobby. But when it came to like, how'd you go from your interest in scale out supercomputing? I guess in AI was using from the forefront GPUs, which was sort of a form of that. But what was that? How'd you get into AI? Like what was the path there?
I think it started with robotic process automation. So when I was at Intel and Micron, a lot of the steps that I would have to do for work, they seemed mindless. And so at the time, I thought, well, there's got to be a way to connect software to do, rather than doing A, B, C, D, and E, I just want to do A to E while I'm at lunch. And so I was working on writing code that get access to databases. There'd be an excursion, which is when some product is misprocessed. It's very expensive. You need to do some analysis. So building tools that would automate that analysis. So that's kind of where it started. It's not really machine learning. It's just trying to, I like to joke that I've been trying to automate myself out of a job for a very long time, and that's hard to do. So and I would encourage everyone listening to try to do that. Find part of your job that you're overqualified for, or you're doing some mindless activity, and try to connect the dots. So that's where it started, was that. Then hedge fund, that was the baptism.
Yeah, I bet, man. It's interesting you talk about that because I kind of see it as like you want the right amount of laziness, right? Laziness, and that I don't want to keep doing these repetitive tasks, right? So you're going to write some automation to get yourself out of some work so you can do more fun things. But it is like there's you never want to say be lazy, but you don't want to put up with you definitely don't want to put up with repetitive work, which you see a lot of people doing out there, which is really so you and I are the same mind on that for sure. But let's get to the big question of the day. You know, 2023 looks like to be a real inflection point for AI. You know, and until GPT came onto the scene, you know, everything was sort of focused on how we can build models and how we can automate the work of the data scientists to build those models. And things seem to completely have changed, Ben. So what happened? What's the difference? Why all of a
Yeah.
sudden is AI in everybody's world, whereas you know just a few months ago it was a niche, really, and you know a niche and a technical niche at that.
So I don't want to get any credit for pretending like I saw this coming. I actually want to do the opposite. So I'm going to go back before ChatGPT. And before ChatGPT showed up, I was very negative when it came to deep learning. I built and sold a deep learning company. I know something about it. I felt like the technology was brittle. I felt like we needed something brand new. Hinton's working on capsule networks and these other. I felt like we're going to have to reinvent something from the ground up. Uh, in order for us to go to AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. So I felt like deep learning won't take us there. And then when ChatGPT showed up, I was shocked, completely shocked, because
Mm-hmm.
this to me, it represented a crack in the dam, that this will
Mm-hmm.
absolutely take us all the way to AGI, the utilities through the roof. And it's so funny because when ChatGPT came out, there's a lot of negative press around it can't do this, it can't do that,
Mm-hmm.
it can't do this. And I found that at the time, I found that pretty annoying, that you're completely missing the point. It's
Mm-hmm.
not about what this does today, it's about this is going to be 1,000 times better very, very quickly. And sure enough, we saw GPT-4 comes online. It's significantly better, like night and day better, and it's only going to keep getting better. So why this is such a big deal, I think before AI, the urgency wasn't there with AI. Like some organizations had it, some organizations were making money using it, and really only the biggest companies leveraged it.
Mm-hmm.
But now, everyone that's listening can justify an OpenAI subscription, a paid subscription. It doesn't matter what
Mm-hmm.
your job title is. You can use it every day for an hour doing something,
Mm-hmm.
summarizing, writing code. Um, so I think that's what we're dealing with this year is the utilities through the roof. It writes 80% of my code, and the fact that it can summarize things the way that it does, it's the units of work are through the roof for humans.
You know, so Benny, you mentioned that you know do with deep learning. The deep learning was always sort of like, oh yeah, yeah, those guys are trying to do deep learning. It was always sort of off to the side, and we're focused on you know what we think of traditional, what I think of traditional AI, which is you know all data scientists building models for a specific task. What's the difference with GBT? Because GBT was out there. Is it just that ChatGPT put an interface on top of it that exposed it to more people and showed its utility, or is there more behind it than that?
It's very specific. So what they did, the big breakthrough, because the thing you're hitting on is they had the GPT models before, GPT
Mm-hmm.
one, GPT two. They were in the news, and there was some excitement about these models that, oh, these models might be dangerous because you can't tell if a human's writing this content or if AI is writing this content. And the big breakthrough came when they fine-tuned a question answer data set. So now this becomes a knowledge retrieval opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So you having AI write some Shakespeare or write a pretend post in the New York Times, that's really not that helpful to either of us. But if you have it doing knowledge retrieval, so anytime I say a word that comes across as jargon, or you're like, oh, I don't really know if I
Mm-hmm.
understand that, you can now go to ChatGPT and say, explain this concept to me like I'm 5. Now
Mm-hmm.
explain it to me like I'm, 20. Now explain it to me like I'm a PhD postdoc. And that is game changing. Like think of all the books that you and I had to read that were boring, like for your degree, like thermodynamics, physical chemistry, electrodynamics. These books were terrible. terrible
Hmm.
books. They're not written
Hmm.
by expert storytellers. But now, with the future generation, everything can be written by. Do you want Dr. Seuss to read you electrodynamics? Like,
Hmm.
that's all on the table. And so it's, but mainly it's the knowledge retrieval. The analogy I give is, you and I went to school. When we would do research, we'd have to go into the library and go find a few books. And Google came around, which allowed you to do that a little bit better. But this is different. This is, it read the entire library and
Yeah.
it can produce exactly what you need. Yes, it can hallucinate, but as long as you are validating what it's saying, it's game changing.
When you so it obviously has implications for search. What do you think the implications are for search? Do you think it's an additional tool in the toolbox, or do you think it changes the game altogether?
I think it changes the game. So that it's so funny, if you and I were talking a year ago and you said, "How do you like Google?" I'd say, "I love Google. It's great. I use it all the time."
Hmm.
Now it feels like I'm going back to 2001.
Hmm.
So once you've been spoiled by, oh, I have this code, like for developers, it's the most painful contrast, because before, if I'm writing code and I get an exception, what do I do with that exception? Well, I either address it directly if I've recognized it, but if I don't recognize it, if I don't know what to do, I will copy the exception, I'll paste it into Google, and hopefully
Hmm.
I'll find an entry at Stack Overflow, and I'll
Hmm.
read between the tea leaves, and 30 minutes or an hour later, maybe I'll have progress. GPT-4 immediately recognizes the exception and fixes it for me. It actually writes the code that fixes it more than it doesn't. So I see it as being a complete game changer. It'll be fascinating to see if Google can catch up to OpenAI. I know they're definitely trying.
Yeah, well, even maybe the business model will change, right? When you think about, well, even it's already changed even for product search. I use if I got my Amazon account, I'm just going to buy everything from Amazon. So why wouldn't I just search it using Amazon? So that was already changing. But when you look at it, just a few years ago, you would say who would be able to break through Google's business and owning search? Well, you break through it by changing the game, just like the internet changed the game for Microsoft Windows became irrelevant in the internet wave. It's like it seems like the same thing is happening, but even more so with GPT, where everybody is using it and everybody is afraid of it. So let's talk about the being afraid of it. What's your opinion, Ben, in terms of should we be afraid of its capabilities and what it could do, both good and bad?
So before I lean into that, you can think of AI as being a catalyst. So it allows you to do things faster, and that's good, but it can also be bad. It can allow you to do um, subpar work faster. So there was that example in the news of that lawyer actually bringing some referenceable claims into the courtroom that were they were made up. Shame on them for not fact checking what it was producing. But just like you can use these types of technologies to check your grammar, you can also use them to check for exploits opportunities. And so there's definitely a major concern around leveraging these technologies to find vulnerabilities faster in open source libraries. And one of the things that's missing today that I think they need to implement, these technologies are so powerful, you need accountability. And
Hmm.
so I would argue that the prompts that you're putting into OpenAI, or that I am, they should be, you need to have better user verification. Because right now I can create a fake email, fake phone number, and I can go do things until I get shut off. And that
Hmm.
should not be allowed. I should, there should be a level of discipline where if I do something illegal, writing some malicious code or doing something that has negative consequence, my OpenAI or my AI logs should be able to be audited and brought into a court to prove that, hey, we know it was you. But right now, that accountability isn't really there.
You
Data
know, you know,
privacy is a
verif-
concern too. Sorry.
Verified identity would help in so many different things, including social media, right? I mean, it's harder to be a bully when you can be called out as such. So I don't understand why we don't have verified identity on the internet. Why it's so easy to go anonymous.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So there's actually been a case. There was a case this year with bullying on Reddit,
Hmm.
and someone on LinkedIn was able to look at a screenshot because they were bullying LinkedIn people. Like, look at this person on LinkedIn, and it's funny. I like show up there a few times. Like, look at this. Look at this dipshit. Look at what he's saying. But someone was able to look at a screenshot, and someone was saying terrible things about some of the women on LinkedIn. And so someone was able to figure out from a screenshot that that's a real person. And this
Hmm.
individual, they had to delete an account because when you were able to find them out and you realized everything had been saying online and you can't deny it, it yeah. So it's interesting how people change if there's a mask.
Yeah, it definitely politeness goes out the window when there's a mask and a lot of other things. So I don't know. It's if this advancement sort of brings that to bear, that would be a net positive in my view of
Yeah.
things.
Well, there's a
So
lot of net
yeah.
positives too on the horizon, like the transformations that we're going to have in healthcare. There's also a lot of emerging threats that we need these technologies to help us with. So think of like CRISPR, gene modification, like there,
Hmm.
or even the risk of a singularity being the super intelligence. There are arguments that we need these technologies to try to help us get ahead of it.
Yeah. I tend to always, whenever there's a big leap in technology, I always say, you know what, it's always progress, and the things that we automate away, we'll find better things to do. I hope this advancement sort of hews to that logic. I
Well,
think it will, but
I think we're already seeing that because thanks to technologies like Midjourney, everyone's an artist, everyone's a designer. With GPT-4, my 13-year-old daughter, she was asking me how she can make more money. And by more money, it's not like house chores. Like she wants to make like 5 grand a month, which I think is hilarious. It's always telling her, well, you could learn to program. And she says, I don't know how to program. And I started laughing. I said, yes, you do. And so I spoke into my phone with the GPT-4 app, write me my first Python script. And I was showing it to her. And so I said, like, look, like everyone's a programmer, everyone's a journalist, like not a, and I'm not saying that this will replace those jobs, but it opens up a new level of creativity for everyone. People can do more creative things.
well, you just said it. You said it earlier on that you spent time creating tools to automate the mundane aspects of your job, and I think this is similar.
Yeah. Well, there, just like we have a limited number of heartbeats in this life, I like to think that we have a limited number of useful cognitive cycles. And the more you can spend, like if you're working in a job where your brain is operating at 10%, it's half awake because you're just executing a process in front of you. I think that's unfortunate. I would hope that we would fight for more people uh, to be challenged to their limit. Because if you're challenged to your limit, it means you're going to have to read a book, read something,
Hmm.
or you're going to
Hmm.
have to go across the hall and ask your neighbor, "Hey, I need some perspective on this." And for me, those have been the most exciting parts of my career. The parts I
Hmm.
wasn't qualified to do. I
Oh
needed some
yeah.
help.
Yeah. Hey, learning is always more exciting. So it's like, as when I'm not learning, I'm not happy. So that's my attitude. But so let's pivot to talking about what this means for business. So is business ready for this new sort of capability, Ben?
It doesn't matter if they are, because it's happening whether they want to be or not, and it's happening
Mm,
faster than we're all ready for. So the transformation that is coming, that we're already seeing, it's going to be throughout the entire organization. So
Hmm.
it's not just going to show up in lead gen. It's going to be every aspect of business: product, marketing, sales, customer success, executive functions. Every aspect of business will be impacted. And that's because of the usefulness that we're seeing. So if I wanted to make this hit everyone, I think you're going to see tools that come online that begin uh, summarizing emails. So
Hmm.
like there's some executives that get 500 emails a day. That's a nightmare. Even for an executive assistant, that's a nightmare. But having AI that can summarize everything and have auto-generated responses that are actually in your voice. Now, I'm not talking about the garbage that you see today, like real authentic, like real responses that feel like Dave is writing it. And then you just go through these quick approvals or having your AE approve some of these responses.
Hmm.
That's game changing for everyone. I'm This might be showing too much of the human side of me, but I am very excited for some of the impact disruption that will happen on the legal side. So when I sold my company, it was $1,000 per page for legal review, 90-page deal doc. I don't think I'll ever spend that again. Like,
Hmm.
because you can have these technologies summarize, explain legalese to you like you're five, and then have you write legalese back. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to use a lawyer on my contracts, but it definitely means I'm not going to be spending 20 hours worth of legal. I'm going to spend one. And I'm
Hmm.
very happy about that. That makes me happy.
It's like what's interesting is that the definition of data has really changed, hasn't it? Because the data, of course, models need data, and again, back to sort of the old way of doing AI, data typically was mostly numbers. I mean, it mostly structured. I know we always say it's unstructured data, unstructured data, but it's still mostly structured, right? That went into training those models. Now data is everything, isn't it? It's like it's anything that you can find a pattern with, which obviously means text. But that's really like the whole internet is data. It's not just data that's stored in databases that makes this all work.
Well, data is even more profound now than it used to be. So, data in 2023 is everyone's competitive moat. So,
Hmm.
if you and I are competitors, and if I decide I'm going to come after you and hire a bunch of capital and go hire 10 people from Stanford, what is stopping me from doing that? For most companies, it's going to be your data. Because
Hmm.
if you have more data than I do, but ultimately it comes down to whether or not you're using it. So if you have massive amounts of data siloed away and you're not using it to make better decisions, then you have no competitive moat. But if you are using it, then that's an impossible moat for me, because where am I going to get the data that you've already accrued? So I think data represents a business's experience, and it is the competitive moat. And I think 2023 is the year that we all wake up and realize the power of data for every
Well, you
business.
Well, you just said, in your example of basically reading my emails and coming up with intelligent responses. I mean, I don't think people really think of their email, their inbox as data, but it absolutely is, right? It is training data. It's training to be able to training the AI to be able to make those responses in an intelligent way. So that's a really a game changer, a real a real mind twister. Something that you're just waking me up to in this conversation here. Um, what is so what is it that you have commercial customers working for Dataiku, and as a strategist, what are the kinds of things, Ben, that you're telling your corporate customers about how they should be getting ready for this, or what they should be doing differently now that this is upon us?
So for the customers and prospects that we interact with, a lot of them are thinking more at the C level about AI transformation. And one of the
Hmm.
fun things that we introduce into that conversation is the transformation side has been happening for quite a while. So we have customers like GE Aviation; they have thousands of models deployed. They're The opportunity was always there, but now the attention is crossing as well. And so
Hmm.
it's exciting to interact with companies that are really looking at culture changes internally, because ultimately, to get to an AI transformation success story, you want a culture change. So you need a top-down mandate coming from an executive, and you need bottom-up evangelism, and you need to have process that allows for innovation, for processes to evolve. But ultimately, you also need attribution. You need roll-up. You need accountability. So there are
Hmm.
a lot of data science teams that do a lot of activity, but they don't have a roll up. They don't have an attribution. They don't have a defensible story to the CFO, and then they just become a cost center. And so
Hmm.
it really is the total picture, the total maturity that we see, and then educating the markets on that. Um, so
Where do people like? So where do you start? I mean, I guess you start. You said you start at the top. That's the location for where you start. So what do you? What's it's because it seems like a pretty complex equation to solve for. So where do you start?
yeah, I love that you asked that, because of the usefulness of AI, especially today. If we went into a bigger company and did a full audit, there are over 1,000 things they could do, like several thousand things they could do. And that
Hmm.
might sound like a good thing. It's a bad thing. And it's a bad thing because they might waste time on projects they shouldn't have started on. And so I like to think of you want to prioritize the projects based on feasibility. So, feasibility, what's the data accessibility? Is is the data ready to go? Do we have a process owner attached to it, or domain expert, or is it going to require some type of data migration first? So data feasibility, and then value. We want to have some value assessment. Is this worth zero, $1 sign, $2 sign, or $3 sign would be something transformational. The board's going to hear about it. It's going to impact your revenue by single digits. um, $1 sign for me is the threshold around $100,000. So if you're working on a project and it's worth less than that, let's just give it a zero for now. It doesn't mean you're not going to work on the project, but let's not start on that one. And then the third one, um, I like the third one that came up was finding the right internal champions. So we have a project, it's highly valuable, the data's feasible, it's accessible. Is the process owner a green vector, a yellow vector, or a red vector? A red vector meaning they're antagonist, they're not supportive, potentially their job's at risk. And you want to find projects that align on high value, high feasibility, but you're also working with a green vector, someone who they're willing to go through this change process with you. And if you can find a basket of those projects, 3 or 5 projects, that's a great place to start. And those exist in most businesses, especially if the businesses are larger. And then over time, the last point I'll share with you is, initially I strongly discourage them from picking projects that could fail out of the gate, because you want to get that momentum. You don't want to burn that
Hmm.
political capital. But as you mature, I would then be critical of you if I came back a year or two later, and if you had no projects that failed, then that's an example of an organization that is not friendly to innovation. So there
Hmm.
is kind of that magic number, but I don't want to have a magic number out of the gate.
I
I
love
want
it.
that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Well, I love your red vector, green vector. So other than avoiding the red vectors, how do you turn the red vectors into green vectors when it comes to people who are resistant to change and analytic leaders who could be, blockers or antagonists really to getting stuff done?
I think that goes into the culture change discussion. So one of the things that helps with culture change is uh, to advertise some of the wins through the organization. There's different ways to do that. If you did a monthly brown bag with data scientists, it would not be well attended, because data scientists tend to slip back into their deep jargon ways and their
Hmm.
data science posturing. But if you have a data scientist co-presenting with the business owner together on a quarterly or monthly basis, that's going to begin to produce some friendly competition internally, which I think is good, because you can imagine
Hmm.
if the marketing department is kicking ass or the sales department's kicking ass, what is what does that mean for the finance department? Like they're
Hmm.
they're going to start to realize, oh, these leaders are getting multi-million-dollar wins on the board, why am I not? And so that could be a good way to try to give some positive encouragement to these red vectors. But yeah, definitely avoid them on the projects you start on.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, you got to be a psychologist to work through culture change, don't you? Is to figure out what makes people tick and what makes them, what will motivate them.
Yeah.
So that's some great advice, Ben. So let's talk a little bit about the future and of our respective companies, right? You're at Dataiku as a chief strategist, right in the heart and the center of AI. What are the kinds of things you're seeing, Ben, that excite you, possibility wise or investment wise, that you think can really make a difference out there?
So from Dataiku's perspective, if you look at the different platform companies that are out there, you can kind of put them on a spectrum from services to product, and from seed stage to much more experience, where you have a lot of use cases that you're collecting. So Dataiku, they're at a very interesting phase in the maturity curve. So they lean much more on product, which means they're delivering on the democratization story. They actually have examples of customers loving the product. Something that was unusual when I joined at IQ is I saw a customer stand up in New York and give a toast with wine to the product. I'm like, I haven't seen that before, but that's good. That's great.
That's good. That's very good.
That means the product is doing something. And then ultimately, experience when it comes to applied AI, that is the goal to be mined, because there's so many issues that happen with AI. Models break in production. Some companies are successful, some companies are not. And so the more we can kind of capture all of that in this experience net, roll as much of it into product as you can, and then the rest into internal process, I think it's an exciting place to be. People ask who AI customers are, and it really is everyone. So focusing on the Global 2000, it's just like it'd be hard for you and I to come up with a company that doesn't use a database. It's it's nearly becoming as hard to come up with a company that won't be using AI soon.
So how does GPT sort of affect the roadmap for a company like Dataiku?
So Dataiku, we haven't really seen ourselves as an algorithm inventor. We're really the kind of the backbone. We are an integrator, and so there's really nothing about GPT-4 that changes our trajectory. We have some announcements and press releases coming up soon. I'll get my hand slapped if I say anything too soon, but in the next couple of weeks, we're coming out with really good support for generative AI and for some of these use cases, and we're a premium inception partner for NVIDIA. We're taking that relationship very seriously. We were taking it seriously before GPT-4, before ChatGPT even showed up. And so I think Dataiku is the lack of technical debt that the platform has allows us to be very quick to adapt to new technologies. So everyone's geeking out about GPT-4, but there's always going to be something new. There's always going to be some new tech stack, and I think Dataiku will continue to react and integrate quickly where it's appropriate. How does it change anything on AtScale? What are you seeing on your end?
Well, where I think is interesting is that the semantic model is the fundamental sort of ingredient to getting customer value, because you can't ask questions if there's not a semantic model on top of your physical data. So that's the first part of creating of the semantic layer, is creating the semantic model. And I think that what we're lacking, what the semantic model lacks is the data to actually feed the algorithm, to help train GPT to actually assist the modeler in creating that semantic model. So I'm very excited that we announced a markup language, so we can address the analytics engineer to actually write code to create those semantic models versus using a GUI. You could still do both, and so we can still address both personas: the one who likes to use an application versus somebody who wants to write code. But I think that the fact that we now have code, we can actually use GPT to generate that code to assist the modeler in actually creating the semantic model out of the box, or at least making it easier to create those semantic models. So
Yeah.
I think that there may be something there, Ben, but
Oh, absolutely.
we're really
Well,
looking into that.
Well, maybe to geek out on that a little bit more, Dave, I feel like we're all ending up in the same place. So we're all ending up where rather than clicking through a user interface, use natural language to request different things with visual feedback. So you can imagine a scenario where you're at my home, we're watching the sunset on the balcony, we're drinking wine, and then I lean over my shoulder and I say, "Hey, AtScale." And then this screen, I've got a TV on the balcony, it lights up like, "Hey, what's the status of this?" And I'm doing some things with my voice where 5 years before it would have been a massive project, like a month of work, even in AtScale. And so I think that'll be true with AI, with the semantic layer. It should just be just like you might task a senior or principal level engineer or product expert to go do something. You should be able to just ask the software layer. And then it'll give you the visual feedback because you want to make sure it comprehends. You don't want to go to bed and then wake up in the morning and yell at AtScale that you're like, that's not what I wanted. You need some visual confirmation.
Yeah, and I think we got the right ingredients to do that now. So I'm excited to see where we can go with that. To answer your question, but I know I've taken way too much of your time, but I don't want to let you go without asking founder to founder. I mean, there's a lot of future entrepreneurs out there, or entrepreneurs that are trying to do what they're doing and be successful. And you've seen a lot of that, Ben, as a founder. So what are some of the things you think? What's some of the advice you can give to an entrepreneur out there? Some things that to avoid, some things to do. So the do's and the don'ts of being an entrepreneur. What would you say?
That's a complicated question because I've been critical in the past of first time entrepreneurs because they're just like I was that, right? So it's so stupid.
We all were that, yeah.
We all were that.
Right.
And
but we knew we look back and we say, how stupid were we when we were the first time entrepreneur? So
yeah,
it's not like we're being critical to other people there. We're being, honest with ourselves.
I was talking to a VC and I was saying, yeah, these first time entrepreneurs, they're just bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, they're so naive, and I was kind of taking a negative tangent on them as like a persona. And this VC said they need that. They need that impossible reality distortion take over the world. They've got, the next Facebook of their industry. They need that. And he had a fair point. It's like, well, I guess they do because they're quitting their jobs. Like, imagine if you're a first time entrepreneur and you just quit your job and you meet me in a bar. And if I just take the most negative perspective on if I could bet against you, I'd probably make my money back. You're going to make these mistakes. You're going to have to pivot multiple times. If you have a co-founder, you might get in a disagreement where you have to remove them. Like you could go down a list of like all of this crap that's coming. Oh, and you're gonna have to fire someone in the next 4 months. And if you don't, you're an idiot. And like you could come up with a list of stuff where as a first-time founder, I don't know if I'd want them to be, I would just encourage them to have good mentors, right? Like have good mentors.
Yeah. You're going to make first time mistakes. I mean, it's the difference between experience and not experience. Is like you're going to step into some potholes. And once you've done that a couple times, you're smart enough to avoid those on the next run.
You did remind me of one that was especially painful. Sometimes you're kind of whipsawing between urgency and strategy. Like sometimes you're totally consumed by urgency, just customer demands, angry customer, you're doing these different things. And one of the things I wish I could go back in time and kind of help myself out with is, if the customer is screaming for something that's urgent, like let's say I was dealing with something that was completely consuming for a month. I wish I had enforced a moment of strategy, just like,
Mm.
you know, every 2 weeks, half a Friday, take it off with your co-founders. If money wasn't an issue, if you could fire 20% of your customers, what would you do? And it would just be a really good, I think there would have been opportunity to just kind of have a fresh perspective. Because I think if you're stuck in the 100-hour work weeks for 4 weeks, just trying to
Yeah.
appease a particular customer, you could be so off course on strategy, but also you're not lifting you're not lifting your view and looking at the horizon. You're just stuck chasing your toes.
You're reacting, right? You're
Yeah.
reacting as as opposed to being proactive. You're just reacting, and you're
Yeah.
reactive, and you can't because you don't have the time to do anything otherwise.
Yeah.
So like my little trick, Ben, don't tell anybody, but my little trick is I block out time on Fridays in the afternoons. I just put a big block on my Google Calendar, and people still try to violate that, and I'm okay with that. But at least it gives me some white space, and I save that time for doing new projects, for
Mhm.
writing code, or to figure out something that is on my list to do to figure it out. But without having, because you're right, being an entrepreneur, being this, I was a CEO and having to worry about every aspect of the business. It's just impossible to do anything really, really well. You got to
Yeah.
have and trust. You got to hire the team and trust the team to do it, because all you can do is just unblock things for them at that point. But without the ability to really think things through, you're likely to give your customers what they want. And what your customers want is not necessarily what they should want, because they may ask for something that is a fix to an architectural flaw, which is just going to make increase your tech debt, versus coming up with a whole new approach that will fix not just that problem, but a raft of other problems. So, and you can't really get that unless you take a step back, and you have to have time to take a step back to look at it. So that's really good advice.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's I I love the startup journey, and I hope more people attempt it. One of the things I tell people is, when you go to do a startup, you need to chase an idea big enough that you're willing to fail. And then I define failure. So failure is foreclose on your home, bankrupt, max out credit cards, like have to ask friends and family for favors. And when you say that to college kids, you see this reaction on their faces, like, oh, I don't know. Like, you see the hesitation. And then I go back to big enough and I say, and that's why it's so important that the idea is big enough for who? Not for me, not for your professor, not for your parents, big enough for you. So if you find, and I think I noticed that I've always wanted to do a startup, and it wasn't until I found an idea that was so big, it forces you to do something irrational. And
yeah.
that's exciting. I would celebrate that for anyone listening. Find that idea, and it's not the end of the world if your startup fails. It really isn't.
And you know what? And to find that idea, go into business doing something, and keep your eyes open and look for gaps. I mean, for me, that's how AtScale came about. Is it wasn't in the shower that it popped into my head. It was years of slogging through trying to make data consumable for people. But one other thing you mentioned, Ben, is this about when you're young and you're a first timer? You don't have a mortgage, right? You have rent.
Yeah.
You don't have kids yet, typically, so you don't have to worry about supporting kids and putting them through school. So it does allow you to swing for the fences much more than when you do have a mortgage, you do have kids, and you do have college, where the price of failure becomes a lot more acute, and it's not just your failure; it could be your whole family's failure.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'm going to give
but
your listeners some bad advice. So I completely agree with you. If you're a young college kid eating ramen, no better time than to go to a startup, because you can actually, 30,000 a year might be a pay raise for you. But if you're older, you can actually burn through your 401k and do the same. So that's what I did. Maybe not advised, but you could still do the same. Just dip into savings and run.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's you just called out me right there, buddy. So thanks for that. That's what I'm doing. It's all going to work itself out, right, Ben? So it's amazing and it's so much fun, and you have to love what you do because you'll do it all the time. And if you do it all the time, you'll be good at it, and eventually you'll figure out how to make money. That's my advice to the listeners out there. Ben, you have been awesome. I always can talk to you for hours, and we can go in so many different areas. So everybody out there, Jepson Taylor, follow Jepson, follow Ben. He writes some great stuff and puts out great content that you can learn from. So go and follow him on LinkedIn and follow him wherever he goes. So Ben,
Thanks.
Jepson.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. It's been a blast.
Always a fun time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take care, and everybody out there, stay data driven. Have a great day.
Absolutely.